back, everybody, to Max's Monday podcast. I'm your host, Maximus Gomez, and today's episode is a little interesting because I was supposed to have on a guest this week, but we moved some things around, so he'll be on next week. I'll touch on that at the end of the video. Um, our discussion will be about systemic racism. I had class today, and somebody in my class talked about. Oh, he was saying a bunch of nonsense. To be honest with you, he was saying a whole lot of nothing. But um, he said something that was like, "Well, how you gonna say that?" And he said that conservatives debunked systemic racism, which just isn't true. Like he really tried to justify. So okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. So our professor had posed the question: is the U.S. legal system fair? Which is a resounding no. But he tried to argue that it was. Me and him had a little bit of a back and forth. Um, he tried to justify a lot of things that, like, everything he said was just like, what are you, what? Like, at one point he said, like, not all slave owners were bad, of like trying to justify racism, which I thought was, I'm like, well, no, homeboy, slavery is bad. It doesn't matter who was a slave owner. It doesn't matter if that guy was a saint. He was a slave owner, and that's wrong. Having people be property is wrong. No matter how well you treat it. I treat my bed well, right? I I, I clean my clothes, right? As I said, oh well, they housed them and they fed them and they didn't beat them. They owned them. They weren't people. They were property. Like, what are you talking about? At least in their eyes, they're definitely people. Whoa, 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 whoa! I'm gonna out of context. Um. Anyways, so I'll kind of go a little bit more in depth because that overarching thing of like systemic racism, is it real or not, is dumb, because it is, obviously. I even mentioned watching, to the guy, say, hey, watch 13th, something like that. It's either 13 or 13th. It was on Netflix, but you can find it on YouTube. It's a wonderful documentary about um, the prison system in the United States, and how it was constructed from racism, out of slavery, right? And that kind of Reconstruction era in the South. I mean, even the police force was came out of it, and it tackles like the 13th Amendment and the loophole that white supremacists use to keep African Americans and other minorities oppressed, and through the use of the legal system. So we'll definitely get more in depth with that next episode, when I have my guest on. But we decided today, we wanted to prep a little bit. We felt that was a little bit of a heavy conversation, so we just felt we'll postpone it a week. We'll come back and we'll tackle it from a different angle when we're a little bit more prepared. But going off of systemic racism, I guess this week's episode, it's gonna be a little shorter, hopefully. I didn't plan on this being super long. But I just wanted to talk about the new voting laws in Georgia. Um, I was gonna do like a thing on gun control, but I should probably do some research on that and a couple other things and prepare for that. But I just wasn't prepared for that. But this I'm a little bit more prepared for. I just kind of have written down like what the law does, and then I'm just gonna kind of talk about why the fuck it's wrong. I've seen a couple people post and talking about, uh, you know, what's wrong with having to require people to vote with an ID and blah 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 blah. But this bill does a lot more than just require ID, which is wrong. We'll get into that a little bit later. Um, but the overall bill is just dumb. It's obviously a counteract by Republicans in Georgia, because Georgia was voted blue. It turned blue this past election year, which woo woo, and a lot of the work done there. But a lot of credit goes to Stacey Abrams and everything she's done down there. And the Democrats, they looked at Georgia and they thought, which hasn't happened in over 80 years, but they looked at that state and was like, we can turn this son of a bitch blue. So a lot of money went into Georgia and into the campaign for Joe Biden, and they also had a Senate race and a runoff, and we'll get into that. Um, and so just it was extraordinary. I mean, watching Georgia. I mean, even for me, my perspective, I'm young, but even to watch Georgia turn blue, I was like, oh wow, okay. Um, and kind of because the early voting and everything, so how long it took, and I just had a feeling. I was like, it's going to turn blue and it's going to stay blue, um, and that will pretty much seal the deal for Mr. Biden. I'll have to do a recap. You know what? You know what? This is what I'll do after the end of Joe Biden's first 100 days. Um, I'll bring somebody on. We'll kind of recap on his first 100 days and kind of point out some little things and stuff like that. But anyways, getting a little off track on a tangent. So the new voting laws in Georgia passed. It was signed by the governor over there. I should have wrote his name down until I missed his name. Republican governor, obviously. And wow, this bill is the definition of systemic racism. Now, some people have labeled it um, new Jim Crow and all these other things. And at first glance, I was like, okay, hold on, let's just see what is the actual provisions of the bill, and like what is it actually going to do, like because we can talk about policy all day long, but when we talk about how it's actually implemented, it could be way different. The bill could have had no effect, but after doing some research and really looking into it, it's an awful bill, and I have a particular theory that this bill could come back and bite Republicans in the ass hard. I think. I think so. Let's get into it. So it's the new bill. So just some things that the bill does. It obviously requires ID to vote, not just in person but in mail-in. Which let's just jump right into that. Um, I don't know how it is in Georgia, but it's like I had to pay to get my ID. I had to pay to get my ID here in California, right? And it wasn't cheap. It was like $40, which I mean to some people is nothing, but when you talk about in poor discrimination, and that's what a lot of the voting rights activists groups are saying is this bills like this one that Georgia passed or will uh, proportionately affect African American communities. It will disproportionately affect lower income communities. It's just not a good bill. It for people who aren't as privileged as others, especially those people of color, women. Um, the list goes on and on. So it requires ID, and you have to pay to get ID, and that was one of the when you talk about Jim Crow law was like you had to pay to vote, right? And so it locks voting behind a paywall, which to any of my gamers out there, we know how frustrating that is when you have content, in a video game you want to play and it's you got to pay. It might be something as cheap as $20, but we've always argued that if you already have the content made, just put it in the game. I already paid $60. I've done all this other stuff. Just allow me the right to do this. Um, so, but put that on a scale, and now have that be a threat to democracy. And when you talk about voting rights, and for people, I have to pay to vote. I pay taxes. People pay rent. People pay mortgage, state and federal income taxes. People have served in the military. I was just saying, and you're saying that I can't vote because of ID. And another thing I want to touch on for all the people out there, voting fraud isn't a thing. I mean, it happens, but the amount of the rate at which it happens is so tiny, it's so minuscule that all these measures of like voting and oh my god, all these people they check. You think they just take a vote? Like somebody just walks into a polling place and they're like, "Oh, I'm here to cast a vote." And they're like, "Okay, go ahead, just sign this and fill it out and leave." No, they check. They make sure everything's okay. They match up the residencies. They match up the housing. They make sure that you're voting in the right precinct. Ugh, I'm struggling with this. In the right district and stuff. Um, it's not like people just walk in and vote. It's not how that works. Voting Friday isn't a thing, especially, especially on on a federal level in a presidential race. It's not happening. And then, oh my God, was I right about this year's, well, last year's election in November? Oh boy, did I see it coming. Because Trump started it in the beginning. They were rigging this election. He said that in like July. Okay, maybe not that soon, but not too long after. They're gonna rig the election, and with the pandemic, they're gonna all this other stuff, and mail-in voting, and drop boxes, and all this other stuff. So they already started with that, and then it just grew, and then people were like, they stole the election. No, dummies. And then a big problem was that conservatives and right wing and QAnon and all these really crazy people had it in their head that um, there was some sort of conspiracy by Democrats and the government to not allow Donald Trump to be voted back into office, back for reelection. But it's just dumb. It's just dumb. And they pointed out all kinds of different things. They were like, well, where did all these votes come from? Mail in. Well, why? Why didn't they drop it till? Why did they just release them at midnight? Because they were counting them still. The list goes on and on. They had so many freaking things about how the election was being stolen that it was like, all right, come on, shut up, you lost. Take it like a champ. My favorite part was in, I think it was like Minnesota. They were like, keep counting, like keep counting, or it was stop the count, right? But in Arizona, they were like, keep counting the ballots and blah 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 blah. So, or maybe it was vice versa. I don't remember, but it was really funny, like how they just contradicted each other, and it just kind of shows how blindly these people followed 45, that orange son of a bitch. Um. So no, and so all of that, the election, and then the runoff in Georgia. There was a runoff. Don't forget, which they lost. Republicans lost pretty bad. I do say so myself. Um, man, it's just all of that culminates into this new voting law in Georgia. It's bullshit. So anyway, so requiring ID is dumb. You need ID to get this and to get that. Why wouldn't you need it to vote? How about this then? How about this? How about we do that? I saw this on Twitter, and I don't want to take credit for it, but I thought this was really a great idea. It says, how about you're only allowed to buy guns on one day in November, right? One day in hold on. One day. Let me just make sure I'm getting this right. I've written it down somewhere. One day in November, and let me get up real quick, just and you have to wait in line. Um, and you have to wait in line. Um, I'm just gonna edit this part out. I'm gonna edit this part out. Okay, so you gotta wait in line, and you can only buy guns on one day in November. And you gotta wait hella long, and if you don't have all these requirements, you don't do all these things, and you don't get a gun, right? And it's basically just kind of like mocking of like, look at how easy it is to buy a gun, and then compare to vote. And then people were like, that's why you should require ID. No, it doesn't have. Why would we require ID? To make sure our elections are safe and blah blah blah. How are they not safe? How are they not safe? Show all the evidence of election fraud. And you know what? I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this, Republicans in 45, you orange son of a bitch. You screwed yourselves. Because by saying the election was rigged, all eyes were on the election, son. All security and all of the there has never been a more safe election than 2020. In the history, in the history of the United States, there has been not a more free or a more safe election than in 2020. They did it themselves. And let's get back to this law. So in the law, it basically says there'll be less drop boxes. Now, just which I think we should keep drop boxes. I think it's only like it's like one drop box for every like 100,000 people, which is ridiculous. It's all in Georgia. I just want to mention, and they're closing down um, some polling places and fewer drop boxes. Now, again, this is just kind of response to COVID. Um, Drop boxes were never used in Georgia before, but then with COVID, they had to come up with new ways and stuff. So they created drop boxes, but now they're getting rid of them. So you could kind of see like, oh, okay, so like now this kind, I think it was like from I think in a certain district, it was like from 32 to 8, which is significant. I think this type of voting, it'll die down. Obviously, a lot more people will vote in person the next time we have a big election like this, just because no COVID. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, but getting rid of them, I don't understand. Like, why make it so? It's already. Oh my god, I can't even imagine going. I did um a Dropbox. I did Dropbox. They had it right here in my high school. I just walked real quick with my family, went and voted. Boop boop. Confidence, confidence. Had no doubt in my mind. And why they would ever get rid of these, I don't know. Because they want to restrict voting. They don't want as many people to vote. It's really how that goes down. They shortened the time for requesting and returning mail ballots. So originally, you could request a mail ballot 180 days before the election, and then you could. I don't know when you could turn it in, but you could turn it in. I think it's like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks before the actual day of election, and then it'll be counted. They're reducing that to 78 days. So you only have 78 days to request a ballot, mail in ballot. And so that's, I mean, you're shortening the amount of time, which again will limit participation, I believe, by having these things where you can look over, you have your ballot in front of you, you know what you're doing, you can do research, right? To know what you're voting on. People say, well, I can do that without having the ballot. But it allows for flexibility. And sometimes people just need time. This is voting. We're not voting for who the fuck goes on milk cartons. We're voting for our elected officials and people who are going to run this country and who are going to represent us. So allowing this flexibility and the time for people to really think and go over their ballots and maybe go over ballots with loved ones or first time voters or whatever. Well, you don't need 180 days to do that. Who are you to judge? Who are you? What does it matter? It doesn't matter. What happens? What are they gonna do? They're gonna if they change it, but that's on them. That's a individual standpoint. I don't understand cutting it in half, more than half. 180 days is 78 days. So, uh, and then it's ridiculous. And then they reduced the time you can. There has to be to the clerk by no later than 11 days prior to the election for your ballot to be um, okay, which is it's earlier. It's earlier than I think before. It was like you can have it within 4 to 5 days. Maybe I'm tripping. Yeah, it's like 4 to 5 days, and it'd be counted. So you're shorting the amount of time people can request ballots, and then shortening the amount of time they can return them significantly too. Like this isn't just I would say if they said 120 days, okay, it gives people about is that 4 months or whatever, maybe a little less than that, but it's significant. There's significant drops in the amount of times that people have to vote and to request. Um, State people who work for the state and for campaigns and stuff are no longer allowed to send request forms to people, unsolicited request forms. So, like, hey, maybe you just forgot it, maybe you don't know. A campaign can send you a request form for you to request a mail-in ballot. And then you go, oh, hey, I totally forgot to do this. Here's this. They can no longer do that. You have to just kind of remember that you can do that, which I don't understand. Don't we want more people to participate in our elections and more people to participate in this process? We're so democratic and we're such a democracy, free people. I feel like this infringes on our rights, and it does, and it does, 100% that it does. This is ridiculous. Um, this one was funny. People are banned from distributing food and drink to voters who are in line to vote. What the hell? How does that make sense? People just want to be nicer. People just want to be kinder. Hey, look, it's a hot day. Here's some water. Here's some water. Hope you so they don't influence who they vote on. Hey, some person who gives me water isn't going to change who I vote for. It might change others, but maybe it's just how it goes. I don't understand what difference this makes. That's so dumb. These lines, people wait in line 3, 4 hours to vote. People can't give them water. Different. That's just dumb. Um. So in Georgia, their Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State kind of runs or does run the election process for their state. They're kind of in charge. They chair that thing. And the Secretary of State of Georgia, he's a Republican. So his name was Brad Raffensperger. It's a funny name. Uh, and I remember it was kind of after the election or like during the election, everything was going on, and Trump was criticizing him for not basically for overturning the election in his favor. And the Secretary of State was like, "Screw you, dude! Like, no, I mean, you're not just about to put all this blame on me." So he got attacked by a lot of his Republican colleagues because Trump was criticizing him and the stuff that he's doing in his leadership. And the state secretary was like, "No, fuck you, dude! Like, what are you talking about? People are voting. This is fun. This is the safest election we ever had. We're doing everything we're supposed to. Sorry, you suck," is basically what he said. And so with this new law, Georgia is creating a new state election board, uh, which has more powers and it's not chaired by the Secretary of State. And all because the former secretary, well, I think he's still the Secretary of State, basically called Trump on his bullshit and was like, "Look, this is the most free and fair election that we've had ever, and you're not about to put all this blame on me." And so Georgia took that away from him. Um, as I mentioned before, Georgia had a runoff election for their senators, um, Warnock and Steen. What's his name? Alstein. I should look that up, but that's okay. Anyway, so they had to run off, and that happened. This new bill makes the runoff 5 weeks shorter. Why? I don't know. There's a lot of talks about making the election process more efficient, and they have to report it quicker, and all these things. Anyway, so to culminate all of this, that was just a rundown. It was a really long rundown of everything that the bill does. And Texas passed something very similar. Republicans are panicking hard right now, and they're in a really tough dilemma, and they're kind of split right now between um, you have your McConnell Republicans, trash, And you have your Trump Republicans, also trash. Um, that are because Trump lost, and a lot of people and some people in the Republican Party are blaming Trump for that loss because they're kind of saying if he wasn't if he didn't do what he did and say what he said, we wouldn't have lost these elections. And so there's a lot of internal fighting amongst them. I mean, internal fighting in every party. I think they're kind of on the where they're on the downslope in terms of power and influence. But I'm really tired today. I apologize. So these Republicans are panicking, and so they're trying to pass these laws, and a lot of it's just like, whoa. It was really interesting part of this bill and in the initial bill before they amended it and even like officially put it out. There was going to be a thing that they were going to ban voting on Sundays, which I wish they would have done. I wish they would have done that because why else would you ban voting on Sunday for anything other than religious purposes, right? And so if that would have been in the bill, and then you have a what I would feel could be argued a infringement on the First Amendment when you talk about freedom of religion, right? Right. Like a lot of churches organized to get people organized to go vote. And so if you ban voting on Sundays, I think that infringes. And again, why else would you do it other than for religious purposes? There's no other reason to ban voting on Sundays. In fact, Sundays are probably one of organized people. Churches organize people on Sunday. Just got a lot to do. Um, so you might go vote. Hmm. So I wish they would put that in there because then I think you could have had a real case about infringing on the First Amendment, which would have vetoed the whole bill altogether. It would have been deemed unconstitutional. I think there's an argument there. And anyways, and so what we're just looking at is the aftermath of the election, kind of start to really formulate, and it's the Republican response to um, yeah, somewhat of a Democratic win. I mean, Democrats. I mean, Joe Biden elected president, but they didn't do so hot in the congressional races, and they didn't do so hot in state races. Um, which I have said this for 4 years. If Trump was just a little bit more competent and wasn't such a piece of shit, I think that the Republican Party could have been a lot scarier. But you know what? Thank goodness for his brashness and his overconfidence and his ego. I think it's what saved Democrats and honestly saved this country from itself. If he wasn't so self-destructive, I think things could have been a lot worse. Anyway, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there. So yeah, these new voting laws, will undoubtedly affect disproportionately um, African American voters, people in poor communities, having to pay for ID and having to show it, and all these other things, and just so many other requirements that are going to limit the participation in elections. I'll tell you right now, I don't. It's going to be a long time before we see the outturn that we saw in this past election. We're just not going to see it again. I think the situation itself was so dire and don't let them fool you. Don't let them fool you. They're talking about, Democrats are making it seem like it was the end of the world. Republicans are doing it too. And to be honest, it was in the fight uh, for this country. And look, I like Biden. I was a supporter of Biden. I voted for him in the primaries, but I did that more out of um, I want to win. I wanted to win, and I tell you what, I don't lose twice. And I wasn't about to see that dude, that orange son of a bitch, being there for another 4 years. Um, I did what I thought was the best choice in terms of winning, because I really wanted to vote for Bernie. I love Bernie. I love Bernie, and I love everything that he's done. But I think he's a little ahead of his time. I think his agenda will be a little bit more prominent uh, if we keep this direction that we're heading in. Because being moderate and all that other stuff, I feel is like for people over 28, uh, in their 30s and on. So, but anyways, yeah. In, was he the best choice? Obviously not, and there's still a lot of work to be done. I don't, a lot. I think a lot of people turned off once they realized Biden won. They're like, oh, Biden won, that's it. I'm not gonna worry about anything else. But there's a lot of other terrible things going on, and there's still people in this world that believe that systemic racism isn't real, which is a huge problem. So this world definitely isn't fixed. There's been, God, so many shootings of recent. There was just another one this morning. Um, Another African American man got shot today by police in Minnesota. Um, God, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. But I still believe wholeheartedly that it will get better. And one of the first things that we need to do is to overturn these voting laws and prevent any more from being presented in other states and being implemented in any states, because you can't make any progress if you take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps right back. So that'll do it for today's podcast. Again, next week, I guess Cameron Nolan, really good friend of mine, and we've been like best buds for a while now, and so we're gonna kind of get into that conversation about systemic racism. I'll bring up that other kid in my class in that conversation, because man, boy, do I have a lot to unpick with that one. Um, and he's a strong supporter. I mean, he was one of the most vocal people I remember during when all the protests were going on last summer, and he posted a lot of things. And I know his girlfriend's really, really progressive, and she was very vocal about her opinions and her views, and I agree with them wholeheartedly. Um, so with that being said, we'll get in that to next week. I think I'm going to pre-record that episode, so bear with me on that one. So it won't be, which might be better. I might switch to that. We'll see how it goes. But anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week. Deuces.